Hi everyone and welcome to One Autistic Person. Today I'm going to be doing a video about acceptance and awareness and how that is an iterative process that you have to go through iterations of a cycle that I see as a way of getting to acceptance, but also that even when we get to a point of acceptance, you might feel like everything's okay, but actually you might have to go back through those iterations again. I'm kind of putting two thought processes here together. Something I learned when I was doing a design degree at university. Not that I finished the design degree, loved it, but just could not get to the end of it. And where we looked at iteration as the best way of getting results. So you went through a process, and at any point in that process, you might have to go back through to the beginning or to different parts of it to be able to get the best results. And also the thought process that I was going through on the fact that I have been part of a few different social acceptance situations in relation to the LGBT community. And also looking at grief. And when we talk about grief, we talk about it as steps. And I've only really experienced grief properly once when somebody very close to me died, and it was much harder than I thought it was, but it was also more of a cycle and an iteration process that I would get to acceptance, or I thought I got to acceptance, and then would have to go back through that cycle again from some point within it. And with death, it's very different. It's kind of very different because you never truly accept it, but you learn to live with it. But you also know that it's absolutely unavoidable and irreversible. You can't change it. You can't make it go away. It is going to be there. So what I wanted to look at is this from a generalized perspective, and I will talk a lot around homosexuality within this, simply because of the fact I have seen how the acceptance and appeared acceptance of people has changed over time, and how that is still now an iterative process, even though it's believed that most people have acceptance of. In the majority, most people accept homosexuality. So it's a good one for us to look at, to sort of retrospectively look at it. But I'll bring other things into it as well. But I think it's really good to look at this and for us to be aware of this, because I think we're going through this as neurodivergent people at the moment. And I think we can, if we're aware of the fact that it is an iterative process, that we can see what we need to do to be able to get to an end result of getting what we need, which is ultimately equity, to be able to live our lives the way that we need to. I've looked at it a lot, as I've mentioned before, because of the fact that I am starting a charity and an organisation, and that is meaning that I'm looking at policy and how I'm going to be working within that organisation. And I keep saying I'm going to do the video for it. I've done all the planning for it, and it will be for certain the next video that I put out. I just wanted to do this one first because, again, needed to get this out of my head. So I'm going to ask a question at the beginning of this, and so this is the question. It is: if we have accepted in the most part gay people, why do gay people need to have a pride? If the majority of people have accepted homosexuality, why is it still needed? And I need to make the point of it is definitely still needed. I'll give my answer at the end of the video and why I think it is still needed, but just if you have a think about that while I'm going through all of this. So for me, the iteration process starts with adversity. Something is perceived as bad, as a deficit, a drain on resources, or against a commonly held belief or societal expectation. So that is where adversity kind of comes from. This creates an adverse reaction to an individual, a group, or society as a whole. So it could be that it is one person that has created that, or is receiving that adverse reaction. They're feeling that adverse reaction, or one person is giving off that adverse reaction. So they're feeling it, or they're making that adverse reaction happen. A group can do that, and that society as a whole can do that. This often comes from challenging long-held sets of expectations based on something we felt was important millennia ago, and the human brain doesn't like to forget. We certainly do seem to inherit a lot of our thought processes. We seem to just change framing of we seem to change the framing of our own reality and where we're okay with having certain things happen. but we're often missing the fact that every single human being on this planet experiences the world differently. They have their own reality. So therefore, you framing it only to yourself means that there are going to there are always going to be adverse reactions in some respects. But for us to want to gain acceptance in the end, there really has to be an adversity in it. There has to be an adverse reaction to it, because otherwise there would be no need for acceptance to be gained. It would already be accepted, or at the very least perceived to be accepted. So the next part of this iteration cycle is awareness, and I think everybody's aware of the fact that this is important, but it often comes due to an adverse reaction. So that you wouldn't need to be aware of something, and people wouldn't become aware of it if it was already accepted. So again, this is very, very much the same, and you wouldn't need to be aware of it if it didn't have the adverse reaction, and you wouldn't be aware of it if there was no adverse reaction. People can go about things in their life and never know that things are happening with other people because there was no adverse reaction, or there wasn't one that they saw. Now, today, we're in a place where adverse reaction happens much more often because of the fact we have, I'm doing something now that we couldn't do 20 years ago, where I'm talking about something to more people than would ever hear me before, and that can potentially mean that people will think differently or know something's happening. And I think this is where we sit as people right now. People become aware of things much quicker and to a much broader audience. So it could be that people who, so the people who are raising awareness of it could be people who were affected by the prejudice, or from the people holding the prejudice, but it's often at the same time. Often these two things happen at the same time. So you will have a faction of people who are who feel that they're affected by the prejudice of people, and people will have the prejudice, and that's kind of where the awareness starts. Is it comes, so it comes from kind of a negative place quite often, awareness. Which isn't great, but as long as it's making people aware, that's great. But it's not good that quite often that awareness comes out of negativity. Often this is not localized awareness these days, as I've said, but a much larger awareness, and can be both positive or negative. It's rarely only neutral, and often hold a positive to one side and a negative to the other, like I've just said, with a neutral middle ground, which is usually indifference rather than neutrality. So it isn't actually neutral. What it is that people are just indifferent to it, and they may be pulled from one side to the other, but it's usually that it is indifference to it. And most people are indifferent to things. It's just that people who are, quite often people are louder on either side of it. There's often a perception that awareness will lead to acceptance if you add in persistence, but it can do the opposite if we don't pay attention to the other parts of this cycle. So I'm not saying that these, again, they're not steps, so they could happen at different times, but I think all of them are needed in the mix for it to be a cycle that will work. And like I say, you can go back over that cycle and have to, in my view, go over that cycle over and over again. But if you don't look at the fact there are other parts of it, if you just go, oh, I'm aware of this and I'll keep pushing it, then that will mean that acceptance will come. No, there are other things that are needed to be done. Otherwise, you're just saying this exists. But then you come back to the adversity side of it, where there may be people with very loud voices saying it might exist, but you shouldn't be afforded anything because of it. We shouldn't be accepting it. We should be pushing you to live your life the way we think you should, in a way that we think you should. So the next stage for me, or not stage, the next part of that cycle, or the other add-on that you can put into that cycle, and for me this is a really important part, and that's advocacy. And when I talk about the charity and organisation that I'm starting, advocacy is going to be a big part of what I will be doing. So this is people who are either personally feeling the adverse effects and are the person that has actually hurt, discriminated against, isolated, or in some way not given the same opportunity to succeed, and be happy freely due to the perception of an adversity someone else feels that they could get by allowing you the equity to do this. So what I'm saying here is that this is where I would say, so with transgender people, for instance, people are discriminated against, they're hurt by, they're isolated, and that is often due to the fact that somebody feels like they're getting something that they're not. And when you're talking about neurodivergency, I think that definitely is the case, that people feel like for you to be an equitable level, people feel like there are certain things they're not going to get because of it. and that's why there is that the other reaction and that, but you from that side, and then you are needing to advocate to get people to understand more. Advocacy grows stronger as more people start to become aware. So awareness is really important. The awareness needs to be there in the first place to an extent to start advocating. So the more people that become aware of the adverse reaction, the reasons for that adverse reaction and the impact that it is having on the lives of the people affected, truly affected, not just that they feel that they are somehow given less because you need more to gain that equity, or they perceive that you need more, or you're taking something away from them for you to get to an equal playing field as they're on. The more people who advocate, especially when they are not directly or personally affected, but see the effects, the stronger the advocacy becomes. Now, advocacy is great from internally within a community, but quite often it's emotionally charged, and it's personal, and that can mean sometimes we don't know how to put it across to somebody. And I would say from a neurodivergent perspective, even more so, because we're trying to get neurotypical people to see things the way that we see them and to understand that, which I'll come to later around understanding. But allyship, people who are not neurodivergent, so neurotypical people, being an ally for us and explaining how the world is for us, and that people, or as much as they can understand that, and understanding the fact, and also probably having that conversation that you're never going to truly understand, but it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you need to stop them from living the way that they are naturally, but what they will need a bit of equity to get to that point, but it isn't taking anything away from you. That coming from a neurotypical person is in some way stronger, because they'll be able to argue it in a way that neurotypical person understands. And if you go back to homosexuality, having straight people ally for the LGBT community, it makes it stronger. I'm not saying it should, but it does make it stronger, because if you're allying towards something and you're part of that other community, then you have ties to that community. You're able to communicate with that community in a way that they understand, and it strengthens the argument and helps with not just awareness, but getting to that acceptance point. And the next bit is a really interesting one that I really thought about, and it's accountability. And this is who is accountable and what are they accountable for. So I've kind of broken it down a bit, but there's a lot more than this. This is just my sort of headspace of thinking about it. And this is where I'd love people to comment, where not just on this, but on all of it, but on the accountability side, what do you think people are accountable for? So if you could put a comment on about that would be great. Obviously, subscribe as well. So we as neurodivergent people are accountable for our actions, the way we treat people, including each other in the community, and how we communicate how we as a community are affected adversely by not having that equity. We are accountable for accepting our own differences within the community, but challenging others, as that gives power to people who wish to remove or limit that equity. So if we are challenging each other, if we're questioning what it is to be autistic, and saying that other people are not the right kind of autistic, and I do see this. I think it's not as it's quite rare that it does happen, but when people do, again, people have loud voices in situations and get very angry about things. But if we start saying I'm more autistic than you, or I'm a different type of autistic, or I'm a more acceptable autistic, or you're doing things to make autistic people look bad. No, autistic people are generally not doing that. They are just living their lives and trying to sort of gain awareness of things and give awareness to people, but from their own experience of autism. So we need to stop infighting when it comes to that. It's more about saying that we are all diverse, and you need to understand that as neurotypical people, you are all diverse as well, and your behaviours can seem unusual to us. So, but that's within or outside of the community. So if we start infighting, and this happened a lot within the gay rights movement, and it came from a sort of a masc femme thought process, that there was kind of the masculine gay people felt like the feminine gay people were an embarrassment. I heard that a lot, that it was embarrassing, and that it was making the fight harder. And people who were femme were quite often saying that people who were masc were not gay enough. So there was this infighting that was happening all the time, and it came from the fact that there was so much pressure from the outside for that acceptance. But once people started feeling much more comfortable with each other and understanding there are lots of different ways to be gay, and actually in reality what we were fighting for was equality for everybody to be in a relationship with who they want to be, and on a wider on a wider sense of that, also accepting the fact that we needed equality in everything in life. Whether that's in the way that we are able to progress relationships, that we are the legality of everything, all of those things became less important as we started to realize that there was one fight that we needed, and that was for everybody to be treated equally. And we've got that at the moment, that everybody should be treated equally, should be allowed to live their autistic life the way that they live their autistic life, and we should be standing up against anybody saying anything against that. So I tangented a little bit there, but so neurodivergent people are accountable for how the world sees us as a whole, and that we're not saying that certain people are different types of autistic, therefore they're wrong, or they're an embarrassment to us, or whatever it is that people are saying. That's not the case. There are lots of different types of neurodivergency. But we're also responsible for our own behaviour. So the more we lash out at neurotypical people, the more it feels like we're attacking them, and that's never going to get us anywhere either. So that's what I mean about accountability, and we're accountable for how we defend ourselves. Society is accountable for creating a world that is not accessible for everyone historically, but more importantly, continuing to fight against that and place more barriers rather than removing or lowering them. So so that's what society is accountable for. We should be looking at removing those barriers, looking at how things are historically, but that is the way things were. And moving forward, it doesn't mean it has to remain the same. Individuals are accountable to all other people to not stand in the way of equitable practices that do not take away from their own natural or accounted for and adapted to equity they receive. So you are not, so every single person, neurotypical or neurodivergent, needs to be accountable for the fact that you don't say somebody else shouldn't be accounted equity or shouldn't be given equity and having things accounted for unless it takes away from that person. And one of the things I hear quite a lot is in a work environment, sometimes, like, let's say somebody has working hours that need to be reduced. So let's say you need to go from 35 to 28 hours. That I've heard, well, that could add more work onto people. It shouldn't, because there are plenty of grants out there for organisations that need to make reasonable adjustments for people with disabilities to get that grant to be able to help them with that situation. Now, if you had to account for 7 hours extra work, pay-wise, then from a grant perspective, that's not a huge amount of money every year, and you're very likely to be able to get that grant. It just takes a bit of work from the organisation. And that kind of brings me on to the next point of accountability. So public officers and public run organisations are responsible for not demonising anyone because it is convenient, it costs less to do so, is easier, or is politically the smart move, which unfortunately is happening quite a lot at the moment. Transgender people are being used as political pawns. I believe that neurodivergent people are also now being used as a political pawn. So it's and the thing is that it makes it look like resources are being used in a way that there's more resources being given out, when actually that isn't the case. And everyone is accountable for themselves and their own learning. Adjustment is the next bit. So all of these begin with A. I forgot to say that at the beginning. All of these begin with A. So adjustment periods are when people have noticed the adverse effects, have raised awareness, have advocated and seen where they are where they are accountable, and acted on that in the best way that they can. Then we as individuals, as a society, as organisations, and as human beings, adjust so the equity is possible for everyone. And that should come at the time you get acceptance at the same time. So acceptance will often happen after or during the adjustment period. And this in itself, the acceptance and adjustment side of things, can be an iterative process as well. So you can kind of keep going back and forwards between acceptance and adjustment, It's hard. It's hard to go through this bit because adjustment is hard. But there will be generally perceived acceptance from the majority. So the interesting bit, the really fun bit, is this bit, acceleration. So and I feel like we've been in a bit of an acceleration process recently. We've gone through some of the other steps, the other parts of this process, but we are in a bit of an acceleration process here. And I think this could be misinterpreted as something else, but acceleration means more people will be diagnosed. There will be more resources put into the reason the cycle started in the first place. So in this case, more people are being diagnosed as autistic. They're being diagnosed with ADHD, and people will talk more about it. And also be more honest and feel more empowered. So autistic people are more likely now to talk out about being autistic and say that they are autistic, to ask for adjustments and feel empowered to be able to talk about their lived experience. More people will advocate, and it will become common knowledge that thing exists, or what the effects that it has. We will form a knowledge of what that looks like from our life experience, and more people will be aware, and people will be more accepting of it. But it's really important to go back to the first point that I made. More people are diagnosed. This changes the reality of what people think that thing is. People kind of go into this headspace of thinking people must be pretending as there must be a benefit from this because more people are suddenly autistic, when in reality it's just more people are going to get diagnosed. We use the analogy quite often in the autistic community, I think, of left-handed people. When it wasn't acceptable, more people said they were right-handed and forced themselves to write with their right hand, but then when it became more acceptable, people said, I'm left-handed. And it's the same with all of these acceptance processes that I'm talking about. It was the same with gay people, it's the same with transgender people, but then they have to go through this iterative process. So you've got this acceleration, and it suddenly becomes more aware. People are more aware, and people see it as a much bigger thing. So people see that that people are benefiting from this, and the transgender community is getting this a lot at the moment. That for some reason they're thinking that somebody who is transgender is benefiting from it, and it's very much focused on people who are transitioning from male to female. They see it as that they're benefiting from that for some reason. Or it's looked at the opposite side, where quite often people who are female to male, somebody who is a female to male transgender person, they're seen as damaged people that want to be patriarchal because of the fact that they see that they present as male. And it's so complicated. I'm not getting into all of that too much anyway. I just wanted to make that point of that there is always, you're benefiting from this in some way, or you're doing it because you're damaged. More resources appear to be put into it, often not the case, and certainly not with neurodivergent people. If there were more resources being put into it, the waiting lists for assessments would not be astronomically long. So there are no more resources being put into it at all. That is not happening. It appears that way because people are saying they're having assessments and people are being diagnosed, which is then appearing like there's more resource being put into it. But there isn't. There truly is not more resource, but people will see that, which then creates adversity. People see adjustments and assume they are missing out on something. Your need for an adjustment to gain equity, to start at the same starting line than everybody else, must be taken away from them. In their view, that's the way they're seeing it. That if you're getting something, that means I'm not getting something. And then if by magic we are back at the adversity stage, which then means we have to start going back through that process. We need to advocate. We need to make people aware. We need to make people aware. We need to advocate. We need to show where the accountability lies. We need to adjust and accept. And you can see that this process, it has to keep going over and over again. So it's very complicated because, like I say, you feel like you've got to an acceptance point, and I've been at this point both from my journey with homosexuality and being part of the LGBT community, but also seeing it from other people in my life that are part of that community but are in a different area. So a transgender person, for instance, that we seem to feel like we've got acceptance and then you have to go back through this process again. And I think it's just really important that we're aware of that it's an ongoing process. Which kind of brings me back to the original question I asked. So why do gay people still need a pride? And I believe that they do. So I believe that pride is still necessary because although I agree most people accept, or as with grief, appear to accept homosexuality. And I think in the most part, that is felt generally. Even if we accept that acceptance is true, some of the most powerful people in the world are at best ambiguous in their support and at worst actively against homosexuality. In addition, the people who are against equality of homosexual people are loud, they're strong-willed and often raising children, so therefore passing that homosexuality, that homophobia potentially on to other people. So the minute we stop, rest and forget that we had to fight for the equity in the first place is when we could lose it. As the LGBT community is seeing, they're seeing this all over the world at the moment, and it's happening here, it's happening in America, it's happening all over where we thought acceptance was already had. We're at a point where that's not the case, and I'm seeing rights of people who are part of the LGBT community are seeing rights being eroded, and questions being put out there that were put out there 30 years ago and are now being seriously asked questions. And this is why understanding the iteration comes into the acceptance cycles is really important, and we need to be aware that aware of this as we advocate. It will never truly end. All we can try for is that it will become much less stressful. It will become much less of a fight. But this is where awareness and acceptance are two very, very different things. So yes, you can make somebody aware of something. It doesn't mean they accept it, and that even if they outwardly appear to accept it, they might not, and we just have to keep pushing that through and making sure that it's not something that needs to be this big explosive thing. It's just being there, being visible, being able to be seen, and being able to understand the fact that it might not be the way that people see it, and that we're not a threat to people, and that it's not a threat to somebody. If anybody has to have an adjustment for something, it's not a threat to that person. It's actually making it so that person can be able to be part of society in the way that you are, and understanding equity, and I love the term equity more than equality. Although equality is really important, equity is a much more beautiful thing, because it's meaning that you get to a point where you all start at the same level no matter where you are. So we're all equal as human beings. Everybody should be treated equally as human beings, but not everybody starts at the same place when it comes to how life is for a person. Pride is still needed, because understanding is not and will never be part of an acceptance iterative cycle. At best, awareness of the impact on us and accepting we are different is what will happen. And we actually can't expect understanding, as that requires lived experience. And by the nature of neurodivergent brains, it's impossible for a neurotypical person to truly understand what it is like to live inside our heads. So we can only have awareness and acceptance, not understanding. We're never truly going to have understanding. People may understand little bits of it, or they may understand parts of it and different parts of it depending on the person you're speaking to, but put it all together, they're never going to live that experience. Even somebody who has a child who is autistic doesn't necessarily live that experience unless they're autistic themselves. But I'd also argue that each individual autistic person doesn't know necessarily how an autistic person feels. They're just going to be more attuned to that. So it's the same with anything. When it comes to acceptance, it is more about acceptance rather than understanding it. There is an element of understanding the situation, but not understanding what it truly is to be that. It's an acceptance of that and an awareness of what that might feel like, but you're not going to understand it, and you're not going to understand what it is like to be neurodivergent unless you are, and you don't know what it's like. You're not going to understand what it's like to be part of the LGBT community unless you are somebody who falls within one of those categorizations and lives their life in that way. You can be an ally, you can be somebody who supports it and understands the challenges that people face, but it doesn't mean that you truly understand what it is like to live that. And I think when trying to get people to understand it internally is very difficult, and we don't need to get to an understanding point. We need to get to an awareness point and an acceptance point. And if people understand it, great, but we can't truly get people to understand something that is totally different to their lived experience. You're never going to do that. You're going to get them to be aware of the fact that it is that way and accept that. So that was quite a big video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, if you could comment, that would be great. Would love to hear your thought processes on this. Anything you feel I've missed on this. I'm sure I have. I'm sure I've missed loads on it. But that's my thought process of how the iterative process of acceptance goes, and that it is a continual process that we need to continue doing. So thank you very much for listening. If you could comment, like, share, and subscribe, fantastic. Thank you very much. If not, that's also fine. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the day. See you later. See you in the next one. Bye.